Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader back with you again, Jersey First TV. We are talking Board of Education, one of the most important issues this past fall. And we have on the show Josh Aikens of AriseNJ.com. Josh, welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me here. Thank you.
You are one of the best people we can talk to about getting involved in Board of Education, running for open seats. We'll talk about that, and also interacting with your Board of Education. Not only are you running Arise NJ, which is really about getting people on their local boards, but you happen to also be president of the Lafayette Board of Education in New Jersey. So you definitely walk the talk the walk, and do all of that. So we appreciate you coming on. Josh, let's start with how important is this issue? I mean, the last election in New Jersey and definitely in Virginia was really about the voice of the parent. Here in New Jersey, we saw so many down ballot wins. What's going on? Is this all COVID generated, or has this been energy that's been, pent up for a while coming from parents?
So I kind of preface this all the time. The one blessing, and there was many dark times within COVID between the deaths, the sickness,
Yep.
the way the government has participated in this whole charade and whatever's going on. But the one blessing is parents got a front row seat to what was being taught to their children.
Yep.
And I think out of that, you saw a lot of parents being active in going to school boards, a lot of parents asking questions, because for so long, I think school boards in public schools, let's take that back a bit. For
Right.
public schools, I think a lot of parents just kind of said, all right, I'm sending my money here. I remember going to school. It's all hunky dory. Everything's fine. But there are some things, politically, aligned with the left, whether it's on purpose or not, that is being taught to their children that many parents weren't aware that it was even happening. So them sitting there listening to their children, repeat this stuff, or hearing the teachers say these things front row, I think opened a lot of eyes, and, certainly activated a lot of parents into not just running for school boards, but just participating a little bit more in their community.
You talk about conservative voices being on the Board of Education. We're going to talk about what Arise does, but what happened that conservative voices diminished? Did we give up on public education years ago? Did we hand it over? Why is it that that voice really became in the background, and then we woke up in COVID and said, wow, look at this is completely out of control, and in so many cases left leaning?
Yeah, I can't say that it was we've abandoned it, or it was abandoned for such a long time, but I do think that we turned an eye away from it. We assumed too much. We assumed that it was the same education that was happening 20, 30 years ago. And for the most part, you're still getting that reading, writing, arithmetic. But then came, Common Core, and you get this little snippets here and there. And now you see, 1619 Project, you see, CRT, you start to see all these things that are happening around the country. It may not happen in New Jersey, but you start to worry about these things. You start to worry about these issues. And for me personally, when I got on the school board, I didn't even have kids. My wife, we weren't even pregnant. I just saw that no one else was running for school board. And something in me said, I need to give back to my community. And I didn't have an agenda. I didn't foresee, being, aligned with Arise or anything like that, or helping people run for school boards. I just said, it's my community. I got to run for this. Someone's got to run. And my first term, I won with 7 write-ins. I tell everyone that, it's no secret. No one was running. And I said about a week before, I said, why don't you just throw my name on there? Just write my name in.
Wow.
And I've been on for 8 years now. And,
wow. From a write-in.
For the first time writing. Yeah. I've gotten a couple more votes since then, but it's still a small area.
Of course.
So I think that for parents or for conservative voices, they just turned a blind eye. They were too trusting of what was happening. And now with COVID, with virtual learning, with all of these things that are happening, I think that they've said, wait a minute, maybe we need to turn back to this.
And in some cases, for parents that could, from a financial standpoint, some simply exited the public school system and chose something entirely different for their children, private school, parochial school, and being ensured that they would get sort of the type of education and environment that they wanted. And so we've had that problem as well.
Mhm.
Talk to us about Arise, because Arise, the timing of Arise is interesting. It started really kind of pre-pandemic, or right as the pandemic was coming out, and then you found yourself really in the middle of one of the hottest issues going on. Tell us about the genesis of this.
So our good friend, good friend, Mr. Rizzo, Pastor Phil, he began Arise, and I was there when he, first started talking about it. And he said, "Do you want to get in on this?" And I said, "Right now I just want to focus on schools." There wasn't like a clear mission of what was going on at that time. So, but I kept helping him out anytime I could, just, offhand, "Hey, did you read this story?" Or, "Hey, did you see that this was happening?" And then he gives me a call and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about running for governor." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's great. You should go run for governor." He's like, "I can't be the president of Arise, and I don't want it to die." And I said, "Well, I don't want it to die either. I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good process." He's like, "So can you come to a board meeting?" So I came to a board meeting, and that was my first meeting that they elected me as their chairman. So that was it. There was no plan.
Okay.
From there, I tell people, I said, when I first took over, I assumed that I was going to help maybe, 15, 20 people, because I didn't think it was going to be that big of an issue. However, the current administration, well, the at-time administration, and now the current administration of Governor Murphy, he just kept giving us gifts. He kept pushing this stuff down. And I just kept saying to people, I can't believe he's doing this. In an election year, in a time where this is not polling very well, he kept pushing it. I'm like, all right, well. So we ended up hooking up with other grassroots organizations, such as yourself, We the People, Jersey Strong, Moms for Liberty. I mean, the list goes on. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there in front of like thousands of parents, mostly moms, but thousands of parents saying, "We need help." And I was like very unprepared for all of this, because at that time it was really, the other members of my board, they're on other grassroots organizations, so they have their own issues. So this is just me like sending emails out, all this stuff. And thankfully now we have a little more of an administrative setup, and we're more prepared for what's going on. But we ended up having a little over 300 candidates run for school boards last year. Just under half of that ended up actually getting on. So
that's amazing, Josh. That's amazing.
I would have liked a little higher.
Okay.
However, this year, it's stepping stones. I kind of got anxious, and I'm sitting there reading through every single election, and then I got people sending me, "I'm only up by 15 votes," and they're starting to count the mail-in ballots. I'm like, oh my God. I had someone, I think it was in Montville, only lose by like 1 or 2 votes.
Yeah, of course. It happens at that local level. But one of the reasons it's so important is, they always say politics is local. When you think about your ability to really influence what's going on, in your state, isn't it down your street at your school board? Don't we need to start there? And do you think parents are finally getting that that's where change begins?
So yeah, that's sort of my personal philosophy is, if I don't want to go take care of, all these big, broad issues, if my neighborhood, if my community is not taken care of first, how can I go ahead and say that I'm going to be a good leader for you, for this state, for, the country, if I haven't taken care of my own house or my own community, my own street, my own school?
Yeah.
So I try to instill that into the people that I'm speaking to. A lot of people have these visions to go off and do all that stuff, and that's great and wonderful that they have the passion to do that. But I said, take care of your own town first. Have some sort of proven item locally, because school boards, as you know, is a non-political position. It's not right. You're not running. I try to tell people that, like, oh, I'm a Republican and I'm running down in Clark Township, or I'm running down in, Hudson County. I said, you're not running as, Elizabeth Nader, the Republican. You're running as Elizabeth Nader, the mom I see at my kids' practices.
Right.
I said, and some of the issues that you need to speak to are not necessarily political. I said, we're trying to improve our kids' schools. That hits home with every parent of every political affiliation, independent, Republican, Democrat. It doesn't matter. I said, your biggest thing here is to try to convince people that you're trying to do the best for their kids, for our kids as a community. And some people that worked well. Some people listened. Some people did their own thing and still won, and that's great. We have a large group of people that are running. I mean, we had a lady who came to me, and she was a Democrat, and she was almost in tears trying to admit that. And I said, I'll help you. I said, I want you to get on a board.
Yeah.
I don't care what you feel about national politics. How do you feel about local politics? Do you feel that you, the taxpayer, should have control over your school? And she's like, absolutely. I don't believe in masks and options and all this stuff. I'm like, great, let's help you out.
Well, it's an interesting thing that you bring up, that Board of Education is supposed to be nonpartisan,
Yeah, it's
and
supposed
it
to be.
is. But in 2012, I think it was, when Governor Christie changed when most of the elections were, or allowed communities to have their Board of Education elections at the same time as the other elections in November.
Mhm.
I think from that, a lot of people feel as though it started to become a partisan issue, because there was even visibly on a ballot may have been alignment with a party or another. And not everyone has their election then, but a lot of the school boards decided to make that change. So it's interesting that you say it's not supposed to be. And I think we all know that on some level or another, but yet it's felt very intense lately, right? These meetings, it's felt as though there was a clash between left and right in a school board meeting that was never supposed to be that way. Why has it gotten so intense?
I think there's a couple parts to that. I think the first part is a lot of parents don't fully grasp how much power a local board has. Um, and the other thing is, there are board members out there who do have an agenda one way or another, whether they're on the right or the left. They do have an agenda, and it is very obvious.
Mhm.
And that doesn't play well to a lot of people, because, in my opinion, and I've told other interviewers about this, I said my objective is to have all of politics out of schooling. I don't want my kids in elementary school to have any idea about politics whatsoever. I want them to learn how to read and write, science, math, all those subjects that we've always
Right.
learned in our entire life. Let's have our kids have a better education, and then let them digest the world as the world comes to them, not tell them how they're supposed to be digesting the world. Politics, just as well as I do, it's ugly, it's grim, and a lot of times it's cutthroat.
Yeah.
And that has no place in our educational system. And if you're not teaching the basics of education, and I do think that a lot of teachers get a bad rap because of how the NJEA is aligned.
Right.
But there's a lot of teachers out there that just want to do a good job, that are completely strapped to the regulations and the requirements that the state has put down upon them. And their hands are tied for a lot of these things. And the same thing happens with boards. A lot of the decisions that boards make is out of their hands.
Well, that's an important point, because Murphy made a lot of decisions as our dictator, and frankly, he did. He just acted as though he were the only one that can make these decisions. And I think, besides being upset with him, I think a lot of the focus became, towards the school board. And a lot of parents thought they have more power than they actually do. So when it comes to things like masks, when it comes to mandates, when it comes to the things that the governor puts forth, how much power really does a board of education has? And do parents need to be fair to them a little bit more, understanding what those limits are?
So when Executive Order 251 came out, I did some analysis on it, because we, at my school, the prior year, we were open all year, every day, 5 days. We just made it work. We aligned the classrooms, we changed the schedules. Some of the teachers weren't teaching the subject area that they were strong in, but we just wanted to make sure that in-person learning was happening. So when we started looking at Executive Order 145, I think it was. There's so many executive orders at this point. Let's just call it 145. I don't know if it was. I'm sure someone will fact check me. It talked about some of the exemptions, and the exemptions were excessive heat at the time. I think now it's changed to extreme heat. So I talked to my board attorney, because what happened was, it was a warm day in April, like really warm, and the kids are outside in masks, obviously, and they were all coming in. They're having trouble breathing. Well, of course, the pollen's out. It's just what's going to happen. And so I talked to our attorney. And this is me talking. I'm not representing the school at all. This is me just representing myself. And we had a discussion about what does extreme mean. And he's like, well, you can kind of twist that however you want. I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm not an attorney, but that's interesting that you could start using language against them. Yeah. So we took masks off, and roughly 3 weeks later, the governor allowed the kids to take masks off outside.
Right.
So when he put out 251, the first thing I did was I started analyzing it. I started looking through each and every word, and it talked about health. If the health of the child is going to be inhibited. So it doesn't say whether that was physical health. I know in my heart that was the intention, but it just said health. And there is a big push now for mental, social, and emotional health of children.
Of course.
So I instead, brought it to my attorney. Actually, brought it to the attorney who ran the lawsuit against Governor Murphy, Bruce something, and I brought it to him, and he, both of them said I never really thought about it that way. And I said, why can't the parents write a letter that states that this is creating some sort of social, emotional, unhealthy situation for my child? Parents know the kids better than any doctor or pediatrician,
Right.
So why can't we present that? Sure enough, they went with it. They were like, that's good. And Middletown actually put into place the very next day that same proposal.
Right.
And a day after that, he took that away.
I
So
remember. Yeah.
I have a lot of people that blame me for 253. 253 isn't all mine, but the one exemption probably is. There is still an exemption out there. So boards can probably try certain things. It's just a matter of the right situation, the right board, the right superintendent, the right attorney. So
right.
all those things have to align.
Yeah, and that's where who you vote for matters, right? That's where, how much are they willing to push back? Are they willing to be aggressive and stand up for what's best for the children in their school district? Now, that brings me to another question, because I hear both sides of this. Where do you stand on consolidating school districts? So we hear a lot of talk about that. Some people are in favor for various reasons. Others are not. And I bring it up because, you fought for your kids specifically to your situation, what you were seeing. It makes it very, very local and very personal. If you consolidate, does that change? Where do you stand on that?
So I had actually a back and forth a couple of years ago with Senator O'Scanlan regarding this. And I've had some conversations with our senator up here, Senator Oroho. The idea of consolidating physical buildings doesn't work for an area like, say, Sussex County or Warren County.
Right.
We are so spread out.
Right.
Some of these districts, personal story, when I was going to high school, it's 45 minutes to an hour bus ride. So now you're going to tell me you're going to put a 6-7-year-old on a bus for an hour one way?
No,
that's not really appropriate. Can districts and should districts consolidate some of the administration or front office? I think if it's beneficial for them to do so, then I believe it is. I mean, my district, we do shared service in almost every facet possible. The state does make it very difficult. They make you jump through hoops. They make you run through, if you really wanted to consolidate 2 school districts into one, they make you jump through so many hoops. I believe that there's only been 2 districts in the entire state that have actually completed this process and went through with it since the inception, which was probably back in the 80s.
Yeah.
If they got rid of the cost to the districts to maybe run these studies or run these hoops, maybe some school districts could be doing this. But certainly, I think there's some school districts that in more of a condensed area that probably could do that. But a part of me also says, no, this is local. I want to say in what happens in my school district.
Right.
I don't want to get bullied by a school district that's bigger than me. I live in the area because I like the school district.
All right.
Now, if we had the option of having full choice, that's a whole other issue, which
that was my next
support. All right, I completely support that. Yes.
How did you know that? Because that's what I was asking you next, where you stand on school choice. Because here's another issue that it's always been there as an issue, and we have what we have in New Jersey, which is really not much of anything in that regard. So where do you stand on that? You're supportive of it. Do you think we should try to push that legislatively again in this state?
So I'll put it this way. So you live in your town. If you move to one town over with your school age children, that new district would get the money.
Right.
Your school age children will move to that district. Your money would go with you. So why do we not tie the funding to the children themselves?
Yeah.
I don't understand it, and I'm sure people want to think of like some sort of other social program that we have out there that gets used and abused, but that's because the money is going back to the people. The money should be going district to district, not back to me individually for a check to send them somewhere and then me not sending them. Right. But I also think that maybe we should also be looking to fund homeschool. Homeschool and pod learning has become massive in the last year and a half, 2 years. And it's not as if those people aren't working. They're working and teaching, and
Of course.
while it's not in the confines of a standard classroom, I don't understand why that's not something to be considered. A lot of moms and dads that are doing that, why would they not get compensated for performing the same act as a public school, their local public school? I don't know why we don't have that. There's nothing more proven to be true than getting yourself out of the situation that you're living in than better education. And just throwing money at it is not the opportunity that we're looking for.
No.
Allowing children to not be essentially a jail sentence to their zip code is the only way to freedom, is the only way to prosperity for everyone across the state.
It's a way for us to deal with urban areas that don't have the schooling that they need and force some competition, but also the kids that need to learn differently, right? That don't learn in a traditional setting, that need something different. And I think, we've got to trust parents more and more. And parents are sort of the theme of where we're at with this last election, definitely in New Jersey, definitely in Virginia. So now you've made it through this past election, 300 applicants to Board of Education. Half of them got through with your help, I'm sure. Where are you at now? Are you gearing up again? Because you have some off November elections coming up, don't you?
Yes, we have. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do believe that there's 11 districts across the state that have April elections. We just started, actually this week, we host meetings twice a month. Once for actual board members who are currently there, either new or have found their way to us. And that is a community that we're going to build where information can be shared within reason. Obviously, there's certain things that you can't share about your district, but I want districts to understand about some of the other things that are happening across the state that, a little, suburban school like mine may not understand what's happening down in Toms River or even Middletown themselves.
Yeah.
So information sharing is massive. And then next week, we're hosting our first session for prospective candidates. And if it wasn't for other grassroots organizations, I would have a hard time finding the time to bring these people in. Yeah. So these people are fed to us from other organizations, people who raise their hands, who have said, I kind of want to be interested in school boards. And this is sort of what I tell people. I said, if you have someone that's even remotely interested, get them on a phone with me. I will talk to them. I'm pretty darn convincing. I'll get them to run for school boards. They'll hate me after, but once I get them on, they'll be there for 3 years.
Well, actually, give us some insight into that conversation, because I was going to ask you, what do you tell someone? What would you say to someone right now who's watching this saying, man, I wish I would have put my hat in the ring last November. I want to do this. I want to run. So what does that conversation with Josh sound like?
Well, it really depends. It's a person-to-person thing. So I don't have any sort of canned speeches or anything like that. The one thing I do tell them is if not your local school boards where your kids go, then where is the line that you draw? If it's not in your very own home, your very own children, what's the last thing that you would actually stand up for? And if you can't stand up for your kids, I don't know if you could ever stand up for anything. So for that, school boards is the way to go. Now, we may not have, all of the power in the world, but eventually over time, and this is not, I try to tell people I level set, some of these folks, they think they're going to come in and change the whole system right away. So this is probably like a 5-10 year thing. 5 years down the road, if we have control of even half the school boards in the state, that's a loud voice. And that is pushing back on anything that they're trying to push through. And if you could do that, then you really will make a difference. And conversely, if there are, political organizations out there who want to identify a bench, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, there's no better way to identify your bench than a nonpartisan, community-liked individual who is well-spoken, who has learned the ins and outs of politics, who has learned the ins and outs of bureaucracy. And this is the way to do that. So I encourage everyone to really just take a second, take everything away and just think, this is for your children. Or if your grandkids are going, this is for your grandkids or your nieces or nephews. Think about that. When you look at them and you say like, you're not worth me going to a meeting twice a month. Come on.
We support that, Josh. You're absolutely right. This is where it all starts, at that level. And if you can't stand up for your own kids, it's hard to understand what you will be standing up for. So thank you for what you're doing. I know you've sort of found yourself in it in some ways, but it's clearly a calling, and we support it. We're excited that you're getting more candidates out there. We're also excited that you're going to be sharing knowledge between the different school districts. And I know Jersey First wants to encourage that as well. There are best practices out there, and especially with COVID, boy, as much as it isolated people, there's a lot we can share now about how we overcame it in the schools and how we're dealing with it. So Josh, I want to thank you so much. We will have you back.
Okay.
We're definitely going to focus on that all year long. So keep in touch with us and let us know how the April elections go, and we'll come back and have you back on the show.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh. And to the